If you look at the debt situation, we saw that by the end of 2019, our reserves had been, or rather by about November 2019, at the time when President Gotabaya Rajapaksa took office, the reserves were around $7,642 billion. Although, if you really look at it, by the end of 2014, we had about $8 billion. And thereafter, there were borrowings of around at least $10 billion that came in through international sovereign bonds, which would have suggested that our total should have been more than that. But unfortunately, we had only about $7.6 billion as the total of reserves.
Mr. Cabral said that at the end of 2014, we had $7.6 billion in reserves. He said by November. That's true. After $7.6 billion, Dinesh, $2.2 billion consisted of very short-term swaps, less than 12 months. Okay? And of the rest, $3.5 billion consisted of GSECs in the short term. So foreigners are invested in local government securities converting dollars, and those were just hot money, part of the reserve. So they were unstable hot reserves, and as expected, they flew out, particularly during the coup. $400 billion just flew out in 2 months, right? So Indrajit, in fact, mainly had to rebuild these reserves, and in doing so, change the composition from short-term to more stable, longer-term debt. So he had to borrow about $5.7 billion of over $5 billion just to replenish the hot money of $3.5 billion and $2.2 billion of short-term swaps. So therefore, there you go, almost $5 billion right there. And in 2019, the government of the day had to pay back over $5 billion in debt, which included $1.5 billion of international sovereign bonds borrowed by Mr. Rajapaksa, right? So therefore, having had to borrow that money, Indrajit, I recall this vividly, told us, look, next year is going to be an election year. I mean, Indrajit had no idea that there was going to be a pandemic. He said election year, things might be a little shaky because Indrajit, myself, and Mangala, we went to meet Christian, the IMF, what's her name? Lagarde, right? Christine Lagarde in DC after the coup, because in January there was a payment that needed to have been made, and it was tough. He got downgraded, and the government, the illegal government, threw out the IMF agreement. We had to go back and restart this process. So all that he knew, and he said, look, election year, we should borrow more, so that if there is any issue, the central bank would.
Harsha, in the interest of time, will you keep it short?
No, this has to be said, Dinesh, because this has been spread, and somebody needs to counter this. And I'm doing this on behalf of Indrajit, because what he did was he looked into the future, and he said, look, we have to be prepared. And that is why he borrowed an additional $2.2 billion, Dinesh, right? And that is how that we had $7.6 billion, which has now come down to $1.5 billion. I don't know about the $3 billion. I don't know how much of that $3 billion can be used, right? And Verite has done some work which hasn't been dismissed by either the central bank nor the treasury now for 2 months, where he showed that 89.8% of borrowings during 2015 and 2019 was actually for interest payment, right? And if Verite is wrong, then central bank and the treasury should show that that is incorrect, right? So just to give you these numbers, because we have to be correct. We have to look at the data. We have to be professional, right? So in that context, these guys have put up the numbers. It's out there in the open. If it is wrong, say it is wrong. If not, accept the fact. And one thing of being independent is not to be completely political, like what we just heard. We cannot resolve the problem. I am a politician. I've been elected by the people. My job as an opposition MP is to show what is wrong so that they can fix them, right? But the central bank's job is not that. Central bank job is to be objective. It is supposed to be data centric. It is supposed to be impartial. They're supposed to be, someone used a word earlier. Sensitivity analysis needs to be done based on data.